doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
So over to you, Vinco, just to share your views. In fact, just before I go into that, one of the key platforms within Africa PLC was your brainchild, effectively, where you mentioned to us that we need to build in something that enables some form of credit assessment and harmonization of data that will enable the onboarded companies and SMEs to be able to improve their profiles so that they can get easier access to finance and other trade-related facilities. So that's now being firmly built in. The second area that you mentioned was, how do we build this and how do we finance this new regional supply chain related infrastructure? And you had a brilliant suggestion, which you participated in the meeting with us, along with John, with a number of African sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, where we discussed export credit agency-backed loans, where we could actually finance from African pension and sovereign wealth funds the critical new infrastructure that's required to facilitate trade and evacuate our goods into global markets and across the continent. So with that said, over to you, Vinco.
Thanks, Hubert, and it's a privilege to be part of this high-level forum. Yes, you're right. This is not the first time we speak and the first time we discuss. We've done so before on how to promote and facilitate trade for the African continent. Now, I'd like to start with a global perspective and then gradually focus into Africa. Assume world trade each year amounts to about $20 trillion. That's world cross-border trade. About 13% of that is credit insured, is insured against non-payment by the buyer. That's around $2.5 trillion that the members of the Berne Union each year insure. Now, the share of Africa as a destination that's importing into Africa or intra-African trade is only 2% of that. It is growing, that share, but it should grow more. And how can we achieve that? Now, let's start with what private insurers throughout the world have done. They have invested heavily in digitization. That has been mainly demand-driven. Their customers, vendors, including exporters, want a fast response of their credit insurance if they want to ship their goods, if they want to sell. And they want to have that transaction covered against payment risk. Now, there are a number of large credit insurers in the world. They have invested heavily, as said, and now they can assign 70% of all credit limits applied within a minute to their customers. And why is that? They can do that automatically and online within a minute for 70% of all applications. Now, that's only possible when these credit insurers invest heavily in their database of buyer information, credit information of their buyers. So that's what they have done. If you look at large credit insurers, they each have tens of millions of corporates readily analyzed in their databases. So that's, let's say, the fuel of credit insurance, that you have that information, that up-to-date information available. But most of sub-Saharan Africa is a sort of blind spot here. There is simply not sufficient credit information on African buyers available. And this means that credit payment cover, support for cross-border trade, for intra-African trade and imports into Africa is not insured, or is very rarely insured, unless there is expensive collateral such as bank guarantees or LCs, but that's usually much more expensive than open account trade. And as a consequence, this trade simply doesn't happen, or is much more expensive than it should be. Well, what can we do of that? What can we do of that, about that? Part of the answer is to address the question of lack of accessible and reliable buyer credit information. For several reasons, this information is often not available, especially not in sub-Saharan Africa. There are some exceptions. South Africa and Botswana are exceptions. If you have a listed company, of course they publish their financials, and that's an exception. But for many companies, and especially SMEs, there is simply no reliable information available. This all starts with a state of mind, to be open about your own financial situation for companies. It's a change of culture, but it should be accompanied by change in legislation obliging companies to timely submit their financials and to have them disclosed, not just to their bank, but also to a wider public, such as credit insurers, so that they can assess the risk. But there is also some good news here. There are good developments. Some Berne Union members in Africa have started to develop their own database. I just want to mention Essex, South Africa, Becky in Botswana, ATI, the Pan-African Multilateral based in Nairobi. Also, AfricaPLC-ICC has started to do so, but it's not going fast enough. Therefore, I'm very pleased to hear about your initiative, or the AfricaPLC initiative, to include credit information, credit analysis even, credit reports on the platform. This is a very welcome initiative, and it provides the much needed fuel for credit insurance in Africa, and thus support for trade in Africa. There are a few next steps to take. First, this platform, like other platforms, need to be known for relevant exporters, buyers, financiers. And second, and I think that's really a next phase, we should look at integrating the various platforms. There are platforms for credit insurance, as said, many credit insurers have that. There are platforms for trade finance, many banks have that. There are platforms for document handling, for logistics, for customs, etc. Now the next step would be to combine that. There are already initiatives to combine credit insurance and trade finance, but I think we should expand that to more trade facilitating the digitisation, including document handling. So I foresee that to be the next step. It's huge investments, but certainly for Africa, certainly for SMEs in Africa, we need to digitise. Just one remark on COVID. I've tried to avoid that word here, but this is the more important because visiting companies at the moment is simply too difficult. Visiting also company houses where such buyer information may be stored is almost impossible, so we need to digitize here. Thanks a lot for this opportunity, Hubert.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.